Hey guys, I have to start with the caveat that if I look exhausted, it's because I am exhausted. I've been sleeping very irregularly, working out a lot at the gym, and never before in my life have I actually had this problem where working out at the gym is really interrupting and scrambling my sleep cycle. Very strange. Anyway, interesting issue that's come up in the discussions within my Patreon page. One of my supporters, one of my patrons, commented that she has concluded after 10 years as an ethical vegan, more years before that as a vegetarian, the only way to influence people is leading by example. Now, the vast majority of us know this isn't true, even if we've never thought through the ways in which it isn't true. We've never thought through the implications of what our lives would be like if it really were true, or what's problematic with this perspective on the world. Leading by example sounds like a good thing, and I think actually the medium of television has really encouraged in our culture the assumption that role models, that leading by example, this is a tremendously important and positive thing. And it's not. What do you do if your son is trying to quit smoking? Do you just lead by example? Do you lead by example and then stop saying, this is all I can do? Leading by example is the only thing I can do, or leading by example is the best thing I can do? What do you do if your father is trying to quit smoking? Do you just lead by example? Do you think that's the only way you can help him? Or do you declare, without even looking into it, this is the most I can do, this is the only thing I do? Leading by example is our only option. I like to use this comparison between veganism in both its long-term social aspirations and the short-term immediacy of dealing with your own father, with your own son, with your own brother, your own friends and coworkers. In so many ways, what we're looking at in the future is similar to the long-term struggle to abolish the use of tobacco. There are also important differences. People do not quit smoking in order to save the lives of the tobacco plants, whereas many people become vegan to save the lives of animals. The main concern with cigarette smoking is not ecological. It's instead health and the psychology of addiction and many other factors. But right away, we see the absurdity of saying, no, the only way I can influence these people on that human level, my own father, my own son, is by leading by example. The fact that I don't smoke, or that I may have quit smoking in the past, the fact that I may be an excellent example, actually does nothing to help them. And as I say, I think that the culture of watching television, of watching heroes and villains act out scenarios, of watching role models being presented to us on the nightly news, I think in some ways it trains us in our culture to think that leading by example is a very important thing, or to think that leading by example really helps people, when it does not. I am actually not helping my father or my son at all. I don't have a son, so as a theoretical example, and my father has never been a cigarette smoker. It's a purely hypothetical example. I am not helping these people in any way if I am leading by example. And in fact, that approach to the problem becomes a dangerous excuse for not helping them at all. Now, that's only on that immediate small scale. On the larger scale, talking about policy decisions made by government, talking about, social planning, public education, outreach, lobbying government, forming a group. Let's say you live in a country where the government doesn't yet have these policies. You say, okay, we're going to form a political group. We're going to try to influence the government to put warnings on the packages of the cigarettes, to have taxes that discourage people from smoking. We want to have education in the schools. We want to have posters up. We want to have a whole program pressing for social change, lobbying the government, trying to educate and motivate the public. Let's go interview some doctors. Let's put together a movie about how, diseases caused by cigarettes ruin people's lives. There's so much you can do. That is not leading by example. And leading by example would be a terrible excuse to not think about those things or not do those things if your goal is seriously, if you're putting together a group of activists, So this is political activism trying to bring about on a larger scale, the quitting of smoking, the abolition of cigarette smoking, or what have you. Now, because I have dealt with Buddhism for so many years, I have met devout, true-believing Buddhists who really actually believed that the only way they could help the poor was leading by example. Very few people sincerely believe that, but I've met some of the people who sincerely do. So, for example, you get a Buddhist who is a wealthy immigrant from Asia to the United States, and let's just say they're racist against black people. Not uncommon. If you've spent time in Buddhist monasteries and meeting devout Buddhists, you meet a lot of devout Buddhists who are racist, perhaps especially against black people. And let's say this Asian immigrant explains to you that their view of the world is there's absolutely nothing they can do to help black people except enjoying their own wealth, except leading by example, except earning a lot of money, spending a lot of money, and thus leading by example, showing others how to make money, showing others how to enjoy money, what have you. That there is nothing they can do but lead by example. It's sick. And there's a whole, outlook on the world shaped by the belief in karma, shaped by some principles in Buddhist philosophy that could be, good if if sort of used in the right way, but principles in Buddhist philosophy that very readily slip into a self-indulgent ego trip, that basically those who have money should just go on earning more money and enjoying their wealth and privilege and status. Now, of course, there was a time when this was a debate within, amongst white Americans. Definitely, if you go back to the period, say 1948 through to about 1958, after World War II, there were many white Americans who felt that the only thing they could do for black people, or the best thing they could do for black people, was simply to lead by example. And this was a considerable distraction in that period of time. In many parts of the United States, actually the status of African Americans, of black Americans, got worse, not better, even though it was a period of tremendous overall economic opportunity and expansion, which to some extent masked that. Actually, there were terrible policies, many of the most important which can be blamed on Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the Roosevelt administration. Terrible, unforgivable racist policies that really did result in the ghettoization of black Americans in areas where before they were not living in ghettos, post-World War II ghettoization. So there are so many reasons. I don't want to make this into a 1-hour monologue, but again, actually, where I was in Saskatchewan, again, you had a very similar form of racism. You could meet Asians who had immigrated to Canada who felt that Native Canadians, Indigenous Canadians, First Nations, that those people were living in poverty, and that the only thing that these new immigrants could do or should do or would do is to lead by example. So this is deeply, deeply problematic. And it avoids anyone thinking about what leading by example really means and how profoundly different it is from actual leadership, right? To actually lead people in quitting smoking is totally different from leading by example. And leading by example, if we're honest with ourselves, is not leading at all. It's not helping at all. But the last thought I wanted to state on this, the reason why I've chosen these examples, is that the worst thing about leading by example isn't the excuse for inactivity, which is natural or inevitable. Rich people want excuses to just relax and be rich people and not help the poor. I don't know, everyone wants an excuse to not help their brother quit smoking. You may not need an excuse. That guy's a jerk anyway. He can quit smoking on his own, whatever. The excuses for inaction to some extent are just human, all too human. The most dangerous part is that it precludes asking questions. How can I help my brother quit smoking? How can I help my son quit smoking? Of course, if we're talking about quitting heroin or something, it may be even worse. That is actually opens up an incredibly difficult and painful set of questions. It may require real research, but both on the human level and political level and everything else, how actually, person to person, can I help you quit smoking? And it's probably going to be a very difficult conversation between the two of you, maybe one you have to ask again and again. Well, look, you've got a vacation coming up. Is it going to help you if I actually, if you spend that vacation somewhere where you're not going to be tempted to smoke cigarettes, if you take 2 weeks and you really try to dry out or what have you, maybe we try that and it backfires because as soon as you're back to the stress of your regular job, you start smoking again, whatever the story is. The question of how can I help? What can I do? It's going to lead to a long series of difficult, faltering, and uncertain answers, seeking out new information and new options. The question of, again, especially if we go back to 1948, the question of how can white Americans help black Americans escape the terrible poverty, inequality, poor access to houses, poor access to bank loans. One of the crucial problems is that African Americans had much worse time getting a loan in order to own a house. There was systematic racism in disallowing blacks from renting homes in some neighborhoods. So they were forced to only rent homes in ghettos because they were not allowed to rent homes elsewhere. So, systematic racism involving the bank, involving the housing company, involving the government, absolutely, et cetera, et cetera. The question of how could white people help? Again, just to pick 10 years, 1948 to 1958. In answering that question, tremendously difficult, tremendously uncomfortable series of answers, seeking out new information, seeking out new options, etc. And we avoid even asking ourselves that with this paradigm of all I can do is lead by example, or the best thing I can do is lead by example. If you are a vegan and you think you are leading by example, I think you're doing nothing. I don't think you're leading anyone anywhere. I don't think you're leading anyone to do anything. I don't believe in that. There's a real sense in which I don't believe in role models in the same way that I don't believe in the tooth fairy. I got an email complaining not too long ago that I was being a bad role model, and why shouldn't my channel instead, why shouldn't I struggle to present myself as a good role model? Now that gets into a whole different topic of keeping it real, what keeping it real means to me, why this channel is the way it is. But one of my responses to questions of that kind, because I've gotten asked that more than once. One of my responses was, tell it to Raekwon. Raekwon's a rapper or a hip hop artist. Large parts of the arts, not just rap music, do not have this idea that everyone should be a role model. But more fundamentally, what do you think I would be accomplishing if I presented myself as a role model? On a really deep level, I think I would be accomplishing nothing. And worse than nothing, in presenting myself as a role model, I would be presenting a dishonest, half real and half unreal version of my life. Instead of presenting you with something really honest that includes the misgivings and the contradictions and the uncertainties and the questions, the quest for new information, new options, new routes to make a positive difference in the world. We've got like 1 million YouTube channels where people present themselves as role models, where they present an illusion of affluence, even if they don't have affluence. They present an illusion of leisure, even if their lives are not really that leisured, and where they present an illusion of absolute confidence, of having all the answers, of being completely self-satisfied in their convictions. And I want to present you with none of that. I want to keep it real. And sometimes the answer to the question is, I don't know. And sometimes the answer to a question is, I think we need to ask new, deeper, better questions. And when I'm doing that, I'm not leading by example. And I think I'm doing something much more meaningful even than offering leadership.